Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kent Dellenbush with Cessna Flyer and Piper Flyer Associations. Tonight we have Kristen Winter, contributing editor, and David Asman with Indemnify Aviation Insurance. Their conversation tonight will be things to consider before you sign that insurance policy. Here is Kristen and David.
Just kind of by way of introduction, I am a former aviation defense attorney working for insurance companies. I'm not a complete expert in all the ins and outs of insurance coverage, but I soaked up a fair amount of it over the years. And I will try to provide some of that information, and then I'll let David give you some more insights in the current market conditions. I'm kind of more from the legal end of it, and he'll probably chime in here as we go along, especially if I say something dumb. And then we'll try to field as many of your questions as possible. And let's see here if I can get this thing to work. Anyway, that's a little bit of both of our backgrounds and contact information about us. We're going to cover a number of subjects as we go through the different slides here. Coverages and declaration pages, what you're actually reading, which most people don't actually read it when they buy their insurance. Sad to say that I probably was amongst those when the first airplane I bought about 35 years ago. And, some things to consider in terms of what you're buying, how much insurance is enough, who's actually covered by this insurance, what happens when you're flying other people's airplanes, exemptions, gotchas, et cetera, et cetera. And what to do in the event of a claim. It's a big one these days are hangar lease issues. Hangar owners, boy, especially out in California, are doing their best to shuffle all the liability off onto the lessee of the hangar. And then to talk about, what to look for in a broker and current market conditions, et cetera. Here's an example of a policy, typical declaration page. This is not the policy. This is the declaration page. This is basically just a summary, to tell you, the basics of the coverage, which can be obviously different for every particular, individual, but the company typically, just sells one or two policies, which is where all the fine legal print is. And sometimes you actually even have to ask your insurance company for a copy of the entire policy, if you want to read through it, which is not really a bad idea. But anyway, this will tell you, what your coverages are, and down here usually also covers, what the airplane is, how much it's covered for, how much you're covered for liability, et cetera, and including, which pilots, what pilots can fly the airplanes. Typically, you'll see things like whether it's a policy that has, sublimits under the amount of coverage there. This particular policy is a single limit policy, which means there's a pot of money to be divided between whatever claimants there are with no, sublimits. This is referred to, in the trade as a smooth policy, or in this case was a million smooth policy. Those are getting harder to find these days. Most of the ones that will be quoted to you, and most of the ones people are buying, has a sublimit. And that could be, very commonly, is a million sub 100,000, meaning that there's 100,000 either per passenger or per person. And that's a crucial difference I'll talk about here in a second. But that basically means that, if you're involved in an accident and you've got 3 passengers in the airplane, if there's a sublimit of a 100,000 per passenger, the insurance company is only on the hook for 100,000 per each, and the other $700,000, is only available for, property damage, or people you hit and kill on the ground. And, frankly, you are taking, $100,000 doesn't go very far in an aircraft accident. Unfortunately, it's gotten really hard to purchase policies these days without sublimits, and I know David will talk about that a little bit later when he talks about market conditions, because it's a big change in the marketplace over the last several years. Now, I mentioned a minute ago, there's a distinction. If you've got an Avemco or some other policies, sometimes they have 100,000 per person sublimit, which means that somebody you hit outside the airplane is also limited to $100,000. Whereas if the sublimit is per passenger, then there isn't a limit on any bodily injury that you create while you're crashing. Kind of depending on your, where you're typically flying, this can be a bigger deal or not such a big deal. If you're flying out of a rural, Midwest airport, you have a pretty good chance of not hitting anybody on the ground, because there's cornfields and soybean fields and whatnot all over the place. If your primary, airport of operation is tucked right in the middle of a metropolitan area, and there are houses all around it, per person might not be the best choice. Anyway, so that that's the first page. And again, this is where you look to find out whether your buddy can fly the airplane and you'll be covered or not. And usually this is the first thing you get when you get a quote. This is the second part of the of a summary page. It's pretty similar to the other. Different insurance companies use a little bit different, as opposed to a declaration page. This one's called a summary page, and but it still has the basic information, how much the coverage is. You'll notice that this particular one is a million sub 100 policy, as there is a sub limit there of $100,000 per passenger. Also, the declaration page, or in this case, the coverage summary page, they essentially mean the same thing. Also has, what the agreed upon value of the aircraft is. Unlike auto policies, very typically, insurance companies don't try to figure out what the plane is worth, because frankly, in aviation, it's way too difficult to try to figure out what an airplane is worth. It's not like, cars where you've got blue books and thousands of Toyota Corollas are sold every day out across the country, and you can get a read on what something's actually worth. Aircraft policies tend to go upon agreed upon value. And the insurance company will have an idea of what they're willing to put as a value to the airplane. And you have an idea of what you want, and somewhere along the line, you have to come, to an agreement. And that's where a broker can be extremely helpful to you. Especially if you've got an older airplane that the insurance company thinks ought to be a lower value, but you've sunk $50,000 into top line avionics and basically rebuilt the airplane, and you've got an entirely different idea of what the plane is worth. Perhaps realistically, being able to document what you put in the airplane, photographs with the help of a broker, can put forth the best case to get the highest hull value that you can talk the insurance company into. Okay, what are you buying when you're buying a policy? Well, the most important thing is that first thing is, if something goes wrong, you're buying a defense. Take it from me, you do not want to start paying out of pocket to defend yourself in a lawsuit. If somebody sues you, even if it's a completely bogus suit, you're very likely to spend $15,000 to $25,000 just in lawyers' fees to get rid of the bogus suit. Never mind, if it actually goes on for a while through discovery and whatnot. In aviation, virtually all the policies, the duty to defend is separate than the duty to indemnify, meaning that there's really no limit to what the insurance company may have to spend to defend you. And trust me on this, I have been in cases where the cost of the defense were well into the seven figures. And you don't want to be there. And that's probably the most important thing you're buying. And then of course, the other duty, the other thing you're buying in the policy and the other duty of the insurance company is to indemnify you up to the contractual limits of the policy. And that was again our declaration page. $1 million total, maybe $100,000 sublimit, per passenger, etc. A lot of my practice, frankly, was to convince the plaintiff's attorneys to take the $100,000 and leave my clients alone, convincing them that they really didn't want to go and try to, spend all the money to get a judgment larger than the limit of the policy. Convinced them that, hey, we know they own an airplane, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're rich. It was a 1947 Champ. My client was a retired postal worker, lives in a manufactured home, which can be protected under bankruptcy. It's like, you can't get anything out of him. So you better take the $100,000 and run. That was a whole lot of my practice. And believe me, for the person that got sued, the cost of their insurance policy over the years was worth every penny of it. Hopefully you never end up in that position, but it's key to know what it is you're buying. How much insurance to buy? That's a question I get all the time. And first of all, you have to realize that all risks are not insurable. If you turn in front of Jeff Bezos' jet and you take out Jeff Bezos in his jet, you can't buy enough insurance to cover that. It's not possible. So you have to pick a reasonable amount, based on how much of your own assets you have to protect. How much could be reachable by a court, and what's a big enough carrot to get the plaintiff's attorney to go away. That's basically, what you're looking for and how much liability. Hull insurance is kind of a trickier one, because relatively simple accident, if the airplane's uninsured, the insurance company is happy to take your $50,000 worth of radios, pay you the $60,000 that the airplane was insured for, sell the salvage for $35,000 or so, and they're only out, $25,000 amount, and you've got a substantially smaller amount than you've sunk into the airplane. So keep in mind, when you make upgrades, et cetera, think about, how much you have covered for the hull value, and think about, how you would feel if the insurance company, for your minor gear collapse or whatever, just walks in, writes you a check for the agreed upon value and says the salvage is mine. Thank you very much. Have a nice life. If that looks fine to you, then you've got the right amount of hull coverage. If that would aggrieve you seriously, you better think about seeing if you can't get the hull coverage bumped up a little bit. So that's some things to consider, when talking about how much insurance, is enough insurance. And, we can answer some, specific questions as they come up, specific situations. Who is covered? Well, a lot of people think that, if anybody who's flying the airplane that fits under the, pilot qualifications is covered by the insurance, and that's not true. You bought the policy, the policy covers you. So if your friend who meets the open policy because, you've got a, Cardinal RG and they've got, 10,000 hours of Cardinal RG time, and in fact was the company test pilot, if the, if that airplane comes to grief while your buddy is flying it, the insurance company is going to cover you, not necessarily going to cover him. You can tell on your declaration or your summary page, depending on what the insurance company is calling it, that who it is that's actually going to be covered under the policy, and the owner of the policy, whoever the policy is issued to, is the primary person that's covered. There can be an additional insured. For example, you do want to rent it to your buddy occasionally. You can get your buddy named on the policy as an additional insured, and then the insurance coverage, would actually defend them too. But without that, if your friend is flying the airplane and crashes, insurance company is going to come in, defend you if you're sued, pay you for the haul. But if the only person that gets sued is your buddy, your insurance company is not going to get involved in most cases. But having them named as an additional insured on the policy will get it done. Now we'll talk about it a little bit later, but a lot of airports are now wanting to be an additional insured on your insurance policy as well. There's also such thing as a waiver of subrogation, which is in some jurisdictions, it's good to have a waiver of subrogation on top of being an additional insured. Basically, what it's saying, a subrogation is when the insurance company pays you and then finds somebody else to sue. Which, if you come to grief with an instructor on board, your insurance company is going to pay you for the haul, but they may sue your instructor. And if there's a waiver of subrogation, then they're agreeing not to, try to recover their payout against somebody else. When you're flying other airplanes, this kind of dovetails into it. Are you insured? No, not unless you've got a non-owner rider, a non-owner policy, or you've got a rider on your own personal policy, for non-owner insurance. When I was doing a lot of CFI work, I had a non-owner policy. I had a non-owner rider, which I had to pay extra for, on my insurance policy. So that I would be covered under my policy, if I got sued, but I was in somebody else's airplane. If you're flying somebody else's airplane regularly, you either need to be on their policy or you need to get non-owner coverage on your policy, particularly if you're a just because, if something goes wrong, even though you're not flying the airplane and the owner is in the left seat and he's rated and everything, doesn't mean you won't get sued if the owner botches the landing or botches the takeoff. I was involved in a case, with a Bonanza where the owner was getting instruction from a CFI and basically lost it in a crosswind and went through off the runway and through a fence, and sued the CFI, for not rescuing the airplane. So, and if you're if you're just renting, if you're not an owner yet, be aware that 99% of the time these days, the FBO's insurance is not covering you either. So their insurance company will pay the FBO for the loss of the airplane, but the FBO's insurance is very likely to come after you. So if you're doing a lot of flying in other people's airplanes, non-owner coverage is something that you should strongly consider. And David might be able to talk a little bit more about what the market for that is these days. Okay, well, there's a few other exemptions and gotchas that you need to be aware of when because you've got a certain amount of duties also as the owner of the policy. The insurance company has a duty to defend you and has a duty to indemnify you, to pay out up to the limits of the policy, be it hull, be it liability, or be it both. There's certain things that you've got to do as an owner. One is not to impair their subrogation rights. Where this comes into play is, don't sign anything with the, your landlord if you're renting a hangar, be it the airport itself or, a private hangar owner. Don't sign anything that says, that you won't sue them without getting your insurance company to chop off on it. Because, if the hangar burns down and the insurance company's got to pay out, on your expensive new, Piper Seneca that they're got to write $1 million check for, and they find out that the, landlord hasn't been taking care of the wiring, they're going to want to go after the landlord and the landlord's insurance. And if you've signed off that, you or your representatives won't sue them and the insurance company doesn't know about it, they're going to be very unhappy with you and may refuse a claim based on that. The other is failure to maintain airworthiness. That means that, if you go over the annual and you need to get a ferry permit, you need to call your broker and make sure that your insurance is actually going to cover you on a ferry permit. A lot of policies have got an exemption written that you have to have a standard airworthiness certificate in effect. And a standard airworthiness certificate is not a ferry permit. And so, frequently, people do it all the time. See people make ferry flights that they're basically taking an uninsured flight because the insurance company, one of the first things they're going to do is look to see whether there was a current annual on the airplane or not. And then there's the issue of failure to cooperate. Failure to cooperate is when something has happened and there is a claim. The insurance company expects you to, preserve the wreckage to the best of your ability. Obviously, if the NTSB or somebody takes over, then it's their problem. But in most accidents that you're still alive to cooperate on, you have some control over the over where the airplane is moved and parked. They expect you to be able to provide the logbooks to the insurance company, and they expect you, if there is a lawsuit, they expect you to cooperate in the lawsuit, which means provide them with whatever information you have. If you get deposed, they expect you to show up for the deposition, because if you don't, they can lose the lawsuit. So, those are the kinds of things that will come under your duties as an owner. Basically, these are the kind of the main three things that as the owner of an airplane, you may have a duty to. And, talking about maintaining, not impairing their rights, this is a portion out of a policy where it states that the pilot flying the aircraft does not apply to your aircraft. Basically means the coverage doesn't apply to your aircraft when it's in the custody or control of an FAA approved repair station or aircraft facility for the purposes of maintenance, or it does, provided you have not prejudiced our rights to subrogation or recovery. So this basically means this is another, example of where, you know, what I'm trying to say here is impairing their rights, to subrogate. So if you take the airplane into a maintenance shop and you sign off, that you won't sue them for some reason or other. Again, this could get you into a lot of trouble with your insurance policy. So you may end up in a situation where, you sign a work order and the fine print on the work order says you won't sue the maintenance shop. And so you've let their insurance policy off the hook. And at the same time, you have violated your policy. So now you have no insurance because neither the maintenance shop's insurance is going to cover if the hangar burns down at night or whatever, and neither is your insurance company. So be very careful about signing those. Again, it's the kind of thing, if you have any questions, call your broker. Here's another example we're talking about where, these are particular exclusions out of a policy. Two that are common here is, when it's not covered if there's a special permit or waiver is required by the FAA. A ferry permit is a special permit. And again, if the aircraft is not certified by the FAA under a standard airworthiness certificate in full force and effect while in flight, that means you've flown it up past the annual, or that there's some deficiency in the airplane. It's badly leaking fuel out of one wing, and you decide to set the fuel onto the other wing and fly to your maintenance station while it's leaking fuel, and something goes wrong, and the insurance company finds out about it. They're going to say, well, your airplane wasn't airworthy, so that the standard airworthiness certificate was not in full force and effect. Again, something to be aware of when you have a policy. This also, spells out what we talked about early, some of the different types of, your obligation of what you are required to do when you have an accident or you're going to make a claim of some sort. Whether it's, wingtip damage moving in and out of the hangar, or the airplane tenant next door, starts a fire and, damages your airplane as well as theirs. Whatever kind of claim you might make, there's certain things that you're required to do when there's something that the insurance company should know about. Again, this is the kind of thing that, if you think insurance is going to need to be involved in this, your first call should probably be to the broker. Because they'll walk you through this and make sure that you dot all the I's and cross all the T's, so you make sure that the insurance company doesn't have any reason to deny coverage. Fortunately, aviation insurance companies are pretty good. They're unlike most car insurance. They're not looking super hard to find a reason not to cover the claim. But if there's something egregious, they will deny coverage. Okay, claims issue, policyholder duty. We've kind of covered that. Hull claims, depending on what it is what the vast majority of the claims are. And typically you don't get a whole lot of pushback on them. The two main things to keep in mind is, in the process of moving the airplane, make sure they don't do more damage to the airplane than was already done, and take pictures, lots of pictures. From the minute you climb out of the airplane and, other than getting any medical attention that you or somebody else might need, take pictures. Take pictures before it's moved. Take pictures after it gets to where it's going to be. liability claims, only are coming, they come up when you've done damage to somebody else. Whether, in your garden variety, ground loop, gear collapse, landing gear up, etc. There's really not much in the way of liability claims unless you've taken out a bunch of runway lights or something, and then the airport decides that they want to make a claim. But otherwise, most of those come through, when somebody decides to sue, which might be 6 months to a year down the line, which is why, keeping records, taking pictures, if there's anybody around that might have seen something, then it makes sense to find out, who's around. If there's questions about whether there's going to be coverage, keep in mind the broker works for you. And, one of the first things to do is call your broker. That's one of the phone numbers to have in your saved in your phone if you're an airplane owner and you have insurance. And if there's a potential for coverage issues, you may need to get a lawyer to make sure that you get coverage. But again, don't hesitate to call your broker, because your broker is working for you. There's a misunderstanding sometimes that they think the broker is working for the insurance company. They're not. Their duty of loyalty is to you. Other insurance related issues, we touched on hangar leases a little bit. It's gotten very, very common that landlords want to be named on your policy. Insurance companies by now are really used to doing it, and they'll make them as a additional insured and send them a certificate, again, be at the airport or whatnot. It's kind of gotten as part of the landscape these days, I guess I should say. And when it comes to the role of the broker, I've had a few things to say about it. I'll turn it over to David here to say a few words, about what he does and what his role as broker, since that's something I have never had to do, fortunately.
I'm on the spot, huh? Yeah, so we are your liaison. We operate between you and the market, the insurers, and we find you the best possible coverage for your particular risk. So, and then just like for the insurance companies, we are finding them the risks that they want to take on. So what our role is being more than that middleman that's just pushing papers around. To tell us what's going on, tell us what you need. I want to know about your aircraft. I want to know why the hull you say is valued, just like what Kristen touched on, why you think it's valued at what you think it's valued at. So that way, when the underwriters come back to me and say, well, wait a second, this seems out of the ballpark for, a $80,000 Cessna 150. There may be a reason why. And the more able I am to respond quickly to those underwriters with those questions, the better favor you are in when they're reviewing your whole application. So we play that role of the go-between, and I need to know as much as you can provide me about your particular scenario, what you're trying to insure. Kristen brings up these hangar lease issues. If I know about all of this to begin with, it's a lot easier before the policy is ever written in order to get all of this attended to. So lay it all on me. That's what I'm there for. Lay it all on me. Lay it all on me at one time, and we're going to find you the best fit for your situation.
Yeah, and that really, I can't emphasize that enough. To a degree, when a broker has to go out in the market, it's kind of a beauty contest. You're putting out information out there, and you're seeing which, underwriters are interested. And obviously, as a broker, if they have a particular idea of a relationship with, an insurer that, particularly likes a particular type of risk, make sure that they see it. But, the more complete the package is, and the more information is out there, the more likely it is, potentially to get multiple insurance companies, interested in making a quote. From your standpoint as the buyer, the more quotes your broker can come up with, chances are the better rate you're going to end up with. And digging into just a little bit more in the hangar lease issues, because this used to be a total non-issue in insurance, back when I was first insuring airplanes. Nobody even thought about the airport. This is one of the side things about the General Aviation Recovery Act, which basically limited the manufacturer's liability for only the first 18 years that an airplane is in service. So, the plaintiff's attorneys have had to look for other deep pockets other than the aircraft manufacturer. And one of the ones that they started a few years ago was to look at, and sue airports more often. So now airports are trying to, shift the risk by requiring you to carry a certain amount of insurance, requiring them to be, an additional insured, etc. Anyway, I'll kind of for the rest of this, I'll turn it over to David as to talk a little bit more about the different type of underwriters, and some about what he does and what he can do for you for a few minutes before we take questions.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Kristen. First and foremost, thank you to Ken and the Assessment and Piper Flyer, and Kristen. Can't thank you enough for inviting me, including me. Great presentation, great info. I'd like to point out that all of this information we're providing is to help everybody gain a better understanding of the current insurance market. I'm not an underwriter or actuary. I can't predict your premiums. And sadly, I don't have a crystal ball. We're talking about market issues that are affecting us today in March of 2021. So this, I know, is being recorded. It may float on the internet for eons beyond tonight, and some of these factors may very well change tomorrow or a week or a year from now. So, just take that, understand where all of this is coming from. So the broker relationship really exists for all of the market that doesn't include Avemco. Avemco is a captive insurer. They directly underwrite. You call them up, you talk to their underwriters, you give them your information, your application, and they're the ones that go to their own actuarial tables and determine a rate based on your application. And they are responding to you, if you are a risk that they are willing to take on that fits their portfolio, then they're going to give you a rate. Where that stands with the rest of the market, there's no telling. It could be the best one out there. It could be somewhere in the middle. It could be somewhere towards the top end. It's just going to depend on what sort of risk profile they're looking for and how they quantify your risk. With all of the other insurers out there, there give or take a dozen or thereabouts in the teams of of insurers that we work with, those are all brokered policies. They only exist when the application is brought to the market through a broker like me, or UAOPA members deal with Assured Partners perhaps, and the VAA deals with Falcon. You know, there are a lot of big name groups out there that do the same thing. So, like I spoke about a couple of slides ago, our job is to represent you. We want to, like Kristen said, make you the beauty pageant winner. So tell us why, you know, you should be insured, whether it be more training that you've done, whether it be the avionics that you added, the paint job that you just had completed that substantiates the whole value of your plane. All of those things, all of those gotchas that the underwriter might pick up the phone or shoot me an email and say, hey, what's going on here? If I can respond to that immediately, or I've already preempted their question and said, hey, you know, I know this looks like a high hull value, but this is what's in the plane, then it makes their job easier. All of these policies are manually underwritten. So somebody is looking at it, somebody's punching in numbers, looking at actuarial tables, trying to quantify your risk by putting you in little buckets based on what they're reading on your application. And the less work, if it's all there in front of them on one screen, then the more inclined they are to take on your risk and provide a rate that is as reasonable as possible. Now, that said, the current market, if we can go to the next slide, Kristen. So as we know, you've seen it in your renewal letters, you're probably here tonight as a result of what you're scouring the internet forums and various Facebook groups reading about. Premiums are, in fact, on the rise across the board. In lots of those posts and rumblings, maybe even chats with your own agents, we've been hearing keywords that could be 737 MAX. It could be this and that other claim involving high-profile individuals. There's truth to every bit of all of that. If anything occurs in the aviation sector, there's going to be a trickle-down effect throughout the entire market. Aviation is a small market, and insurance works best when it has a large group. So you know, we're a bit behind the eight ball right off the bat because we are so few. You know, when claims happen, they tend to be expensive, and that's the nature of aviation insurance overall. But in addition to, you know, those keywords, whether you've been hearing about this or not, there's been an onslaught of storms that unfortunately have wreaked havoc on aviation. You know, bad luck of airports being in the way of hurricanes and tornadoes. My own father was visiting Nashville like 53 weeks ago, just last year, and a hangar collapsed on his VA-40. I think just that evening there was something like 9 figures worth of damage in claims at John Tune Airport. So, you know, bad occurrences, those affect rates, absolutely. Why are we seeing such a dramatic change right now, though? What aren't people talking about? What I haven't been reading in any of the forums that I browse and peruse? A few of those things have to do with the way the aviation market has operated over the past 2 decades. So if we go back to the early 2000s, if we go back to just post 9/11, the airline industry was significantly crippled. And as a result of that and other economic factors that played in after those events, premiums shot up dramatically. So, roll back the clocks, go back 20 years, and all of a sudden, instant premium rises. There was a lot of money over the next year or two to be made by these insurance companies that brought on the attention of other uninvolved carriers to the aviation sector. So these new carriers over the next 5, 8, 10 years coming into the aviation sector, wanting to wet their beaks on high premiums, that brought competition between the carriers. That brought things back to the levels that we've really seen over the past 10 years now. So in the mid 2010s, early when I got into aviation, when I started flying in 2012, I was 70 hours total time. I came across a deal on a great Comanche 260B, and it was no problem to get insurance coverage right off the bat. And somewhat affordable even. That was 8 to 10 years ago, and that's the way things were. Now we're coming back up the hill. You may have experienced in the past year, 2, 3 years, where you've gotten a letter just before renewal saying that your own carrier was leaving the market. Well, premium competition kept premiums low for too long for these companies. So they ended up leaving the market. Competition's dried up, and low rates have dried up as well. Now, of course, we get into the past, 12 months, and we know what's going on in the world right now. There's this pandemic. A lot of people aren't traveling as much. We have fewer airplanes out flying day to day. There's a lot of premium attrition. So not only have we had reason for these premiums to build because of the cyclical history of how things have gone, and to an extent, when the actuaries do their jobs, they can account for that expected claim loss. What's been harder to account for and what's really affected us is, well, why are premiums not being paid? Well, premiums are not being paid because people aren't flying. People are putting their aircraft into maintenance hangars, leaving them in their own hangars uninsured, perhaps. You may have gotten a letter from your auto policy giving you a rebate in the past year because fewer cars are on the road. Well, why doesn't it work for aviation? Well, with auto insurance, it's mandated. It's required. People are staying home. There's less risk on the road. They're not paying it. With aviation, there's no requirement most of the time much of the time to carry aviation insurance coverage. And somebody that says, there's no place for me to go, or, I'm not traveling, I'm not leaving my house right now, my insurance is renewed, well, I feel fine with it stashed in the hangar. I'm okay with that, with taking on that risk of the loss of the hull if something catastrophic were to happen to the hangar. There's been premium attrition, which only wags, that tail just wags the dog and causes more premium hike to go on. I know my personal plane is in the shop since December. I started doing work on an avionics project with my mechanic, and it's been sitting there because we just haven't been places to go. We knew over the holidays that we weren't going to be flying much, so that's sort of causing this spiraling effect of why these the history, the recent claims, plus all the attrition. This is what builds together to form the high premiums that we're seeing today. So, we rode that roller coaster down the hill for a decade. highly competitive insurance rates across the sector. Now what we're seeing, less competition between the insurers themselves, and we've had another dramatic crippling of the airline industry, a slew of these unfortunate losses, and premiums are, rising back up to the top of that roller coaster. Hopefully, we're at the top of the roller coaster, or at least towards that top of the hill. As the world opens back up more and more every day, I expect people to be out flying more. These insurance companies need to collect their premiums in order to cover, these expected claims to, in the future. They'll start having some premium renewals and policy renewals, and that will pad the coffers. Things will improve. I don't suspect, and this is my own personal opinion, but I don't suspect this to go on eternally. I expect the exact same thing that happened 20 years ago. These insurers are going to get right back into the business, and more will come in. There will be more competition that drives premiums down. When? Back to no crystal ball. I don't have one. If I had one, I'd be doing who knows what. Somebody with a crystal ball would tell me. That talks about factors that we can't control. Other factors that we can't control is our age. We are all getting older, and so are our aircraft. This is that aspect of where premiums are. That's not going to go away. While I do suspect that we will ride this roller coaster back down the hill, our aircraft are still, largely minus, did math, 55 years old. And my Comanche's been out of production for nearly 50 years. The you Cessna flyers out there, but Cardinal flyers, over 40 years without production on the fleet. So that scares insurers. They have, going back to Kristen's part of the talk, they have a duty to your hull, and they're going to want to fix what's fixable. Not every aviation loss, thankfully, not every aviation loss deals with a catastrophic loss of the hull, and they're going to want to fix your aircraft if possible. Right now, if you've got Bonanza friends, 35 Bonanzas and their rudder vaders, what's going on with magnesium skins? I don't know. I'm not a mechanic. Somebody else wiser, more knowledgeable with that breed would be able to speak more specifically about it. But these are things that scare the carriers because, they don't want to, and I know it happens probably every few days where somebody bangs a tail feather or wingtip into their hangar, pushing it back into the hangar at the end of the day. These sorts of claims, if you can't get a rudder vader, if you can't get these skins, then that frightens them. So these are issues that are going to continue. As far as pilot's age, well, we need to get younger. We need to find that crystal ball in the youth serum. But seriously, we are all aging, and for some reason or another, the carriers have taken on a position where those pushing 70 into their 70s are more risky a population to insure. Now, again, I'm not an actuary. I'm not an underwriter. I don't know what those actuarial tables look like. I don't know if there's truth to it. I know probably a lot of the same things that you read, that maybe there is not so much of a claims history dealing with the elderly. I can't speak much to those issues. And is there a hard point? No, there's not. I've seen on some policies that anything over 65, I've seen a lot of in the 70s. I've seen some hard non-renewals post 80. So, most of us are, in my peers, if you're in those 70s, then the things to be doing is making sure you're renewing. Don't give your insurance company a reason not to renew you. Make sure your premiums are paid before, on that policy due date. Don't let it lapse. Do not lapse coverage, because if there's, right now with the tight market, hopefully this will change over the next year or two, but right now specifically, it's not a great situation if we lapse coverage on somebody that's in their late 60s, 70s, and beyond. So other risk factors that are pushing the market upward, people are like me. 70 hours, I bought a high performance complex aircraft because it was a deal. I wasn't looking for that. I was looking for something like a Warrior, an Archer, and I figured I'd fly that for a couple 200 hours and graduate myself. But I didn't pass up the deal, and that's become a big train of thought. Get there faster. I fly to go fast. I need to there are a lot of people out there that are doing it. I wouldn't say for the wrong reasons whatsoever, but they are, why would I buy a 100-knot Piper Warrior for $70,000 when I can buy an early Mooney for, $40,000? Well, that maybe because it's better to learn in the Warrior, but I didn't do it. So I can point a finger right back at myself. There's been a lot of that. So with respect to endorsements, the endorsements exist one way or another because the insurance companies need to know how much time you have, and they want to be able to quantify that risk. And specifically flying high performance aircraft, specifically complex aircraft, when we get into the bigger the Malibus and the Cessna 340s and 400 series and pressurized, they want to see that time and type. Anything that requires an endorsement to fly legally, the insurance companies are going to want to see quite a bit of that time flying with that endorsement, specifically using that endorsement. So, people trying to insure, I wouldn't say too much airplane for them, but I grew up with a dad that flew. The first plane that he had was a Piper Warrior, and then, after many hundreds of hours and flying it with a family and IFR and all over the country, he finally graduated to a Piper Lance that he had for many years and continued carrying. We all grew, and he grew into a bigger plane. We're seeing less of that these days. I'm a flight instructor also. A lot of students. All right, great. This first 10 hours in a 172 is wonderful, but when can I start going 200 knots? It's going to be a while. Should be the answer, but with people's economics these days, maybe that's not always the answer. We're seeing some, high premiums as a result of those sorts of things. So, what can we do? How can we fix this? We can move on to the next slide. The way to combat, our annual premiums, fly the plane, fly your plane. Your insurance is a fixed cost. You pay, most of us pay our insurance premiums one time a year. Whether you fly an hour after that check clears or 300 hours after that check clears, it's the same amount. It's not going to go up. So fly, that will reduce your hourly cost. As you fly, consider, hey, I'm not going to do a flight review this year. Maybe I'm going to add on that commercial certificate. Or maybe I'm going to add on that seaplane rating. Those sorts of things, not going to help you with, if you're flying a Cessna 182, unless it's on floats, seaplane rating isn't going to really do anything as far as your premiums go for that 182 coverage. But all of that training goes into the pot. All those hours that are accruing, they look favorable. When the underwriter takes a look and sees a flight review within the past 12 months and that it was with a certificate, that looks favorable. So, doing those sorts of things, one, you're making yourself a better pilot. You're making yourself a more knowledgeable aviator. You're flying your plane, which is healthy for the plane, and it's reducing the overall cost of your ownership. Other things that reduce your overall cost of ownership is being proactive. I owe a lot to Kristen in the Comanche community. She's an encyclopedia, and I've learned a tremendous amount. I wish I had an ounce of the knowledge that she's probably forgotten in the past week, because the breadth of these aircraft, especially planes that there aren't as many folks that are experts out there working on them. Some of these out of production aircraft. We've lost the people at Cessna and Piper that may have been on the assembly lines and the original training teams and engineers. So we need to keep up this breadth of knowledge about what's going on with our planes and being proactive owners. Making sure that any retractable gear, particularly retractable aircraft, that the gear system's healthy. We know that both the Piper and Cessna communities have been hit with some pretty significant ADs over the past several months. Wing spar and the strut, the wing strut AD. We need to be aware of what's going on. We need to be taking care of our aircraft. We need to be knowledgeable, going back to the endorsements thing, putting every time somebody puts a retract on its belly, that doesn't just hurt the retract community. That hurts everybody. That's a claim in the aviation sector. Any claim in the aviation sector, it may be like, saying, well, I stubbed my toe so my finger doesn't hurt, but it's still you, so, it's all interconnected. So being proactive with maintenance, being a pilot that's proactive as an aviator, these are things that are going to help you be a more insurable risk. And then that comes down to this broker or agent, relationship. I want to know what's going on with your training. I want to know what's going on with your aircraft. I want to know what's going on with your application. I want to talk to you about what you're, and part of this is I'm a flight instructor also, so some of that bleeds over. I want you to have the coverage that you need. I want you to be looking for the aircraft that fits you and fits your needs. So, having that with your agents is important. Having somebody that and trust. that you can pick up the phone or shoot an email to and get a response, that is helpful. It's helpful for you, it's helpful for me, and I think it's helpful for the business in general. Like I said earlier, when I don't have to go back to you for information that the underwriter's asking, it makes the underwriter super happy to not have to wait on a response. When they pick up your application, if they're able to flip through it, offer a rate, shoot it back, that makes them happy. That makes me happy because I get a quick response, and that makes you happy because you're getting the quote back. Now, what impinges that is the idea of shopping a policy. So in the broker world, we shop a policy. That's what we call it. You send me an application and I shop that to the market. If you send that same application off to 3 other brokers, what ends up happening is we trip over each other. Somebody is the first to the market. We all, by and large, we all deal with the same carriers. So if I take, Jack's application for November 123 Alpha Bravo to XYZ insurance agency or insurer, and they come back with a quote. Well, when the next broker takes the exact same application to XYZ, they're going to do one of a few things. One is they're going to not respond at all. 2, they'll be able to respond and just say, hey, listen, this is committed elsewhere. Somebody else is already beating me. But basically, that just slows down the whole process. And it also, when XYZ insurance company receives a stack of applications that are all for November 123 Alpha Bravo, you look less insurable to them. They don't look at that with kind eyes. And so be upfront, be honest with your broker, let them know that you've sent the application out to a few others. Largely that first quote that you get is largely going to be the best one out there, because the first one to the market with an application is going to have access to all of the market. The second and third and fourth and so forth, they're just picking up the rest of what that first one didn't want to offer you. That brings back to the talk about Avemco being captive. I see people post, Avemco's wildly outrageous, or Avemco is the cheapest out there. Well, it all kind of depends on your risk. When you bring me your application and I shop, depending on your aircraft, I'll probably have a pretty good feeling it's going to be 2, 3, 4 different insurance carriers that are interested in your risk, and I'll be expecting rates back from them. Well, if one of them comes back at $1,500, one comes up at $1,700, and one comes up at $2,700, well, I'm probably not going to waste your time with the $2,700 quote. And it's just not worth our time if apples and apples all play out. So things like that, Avemco could be anywhere in between. So don't give them a bad name, but or don't swear by them. Much to Tristan's point, read your policies, know what you're buying. Some other things, real quickly. I know we've gone over time. Real quickly though, as far as how much insurance to buy, whatever helps you sleep on that. If you can confidently say, that's enough, that's the right answer. I'm scrolling through some of these questions and we can break down some of these, turn it back over to Ken. But, that's going to be a lot of the answer through a lot of the brokers is, we want you to have enough to cover your risk, and not too much because we don't want you paying more than you have to.
Let me just,
Right.
before we get to questions, let me just interject here for 30 seconds. A lot of people don't seem to understand that the broker is not writing the insurance, which I think is why they tend to go for more than one they tend to go for more than one broker. If you ask on the internet, who's your insurer, the answer is almost always they give you the name of the broker, but the broker is not your insurer. The insurer is the company behind it. And, if you understand that, the broker is not the insurer, and they understand the difference, then you can see why shopping, giving your quote to numerous other brokers isn't working in your best interest. Pretty much most of the brokers and the insurance companies are just going to decide you're a little too flighty, so pick your broker based on experience, maybe experience and with your type of airplanes, recommendations as to how good they are in customer service, and then stick with the broker. It's the insurer that is setting how much money you're going to end up paying. But anyway, I'll turn it over to Kenton.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank
Thanks
you
for adding.
Yeah, thank you guys for that. I appreciate that, Kristen. That little extra clarification in case anyone's thinks that the broker is the one that's actually writing everything up, and what the responsibilities are of the broker and David. So what we're going to do now, David, is we've got a lot of questions, so I'm going to rattle them off. So if you're able to just kind of give a blanket statement on it, and we'll run to the next. The first question: does anyone offer insurance for strictly liability, not hull insurance?
Yeah, liability only is available for sure. Not every carrier is going to want to do it. Also, you're going to lose some discounts on full coverage that you get. So if you're looking at a full coverage quote and you see a line item for liability, on that quote, when you take off the whole coverage, the liability line item may end up being a different number.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see here. This is from George. I'm an aging 72-year-old pilot with 4,000 hours and 3,000 plus multi-engine. I've owned a Seneca 3 for more than 20 years. I fly it about 10 hours each month. I participate in recurrent training each year at a recurrent training center in Tampa, and he spends 8 hours in a sim. In addition to this, he flies 3 to 4 times a year in his plane with his sim instructor from RTC. What can I do, or am I already doing that what I'm supposed to do to mitigate unreasonable rates to be at risk for getting insurance coverage at all?
You're doing it right, George. You're doing. If every pilot was doing what you were doing, then premiums would come down. There would be less claims. So you're doing it right. Keep. The only things that I can say: stick with the broker you've been working with. Try to stick with the insurer that you've been working with. If they come back and your broker may offer you a slightly reduced renewal with somebody moving forward year to year, do what makes sense to you financially, but sticking loyalty to the carrier is to be perceived as a big thing. So that's the only thing I could really offer there. You're doing great. Thank you for being a great responsible aviator.
Yeah, right. Very, very, very versed.
I would add one more thing to that.
Sure.
If you have a slight hanger rash, think seriously about just eating it instead of making the claim. When you get that old, if you've had 20 years without claims, I would seriously consider not jeopardizing that unless the money's big.
Okay. Understood.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Patricia has a question. Would you talk about the quote new term that demands earned premiums and their significance?
I may be at a loss on this one. Kristen?
Well, in my experience, earned premiums basically means the portion of the policy, that has already elapsed. So for example, if, you buy a policy and you pay, upfront $2,000. And 4 months has elapsed, so you're a third of the way through it, then the insurance company has earned a third of that premium. If you cancel a policy, they owe you 2/3 back. And so the only context I've heard it in is that the earned premium, was the part of your premium that's been used up.
Yeah. So that's what I was wondering if it was talking about. However, that may vary state to state with the insurance boards on how any refunds are calculated. Generally speaking, a cancel and refund in aviation is not treated the way it tends to be in home, where you have a pro rata by day or month. In many cases, a premium will be considered some portion, often 25% or higher, earned at policy ending. So that's something to look into with the specific policy.
Okay. Another question. This is pretty much geared to David. Does my broker, you, shop Avemco, or should I also apply with Avemco to see what they offer?
Yeah. So your brokers have no access to Avemco. So yeah, if you're interested in seeing what they'll do on your risk, by all means, give them a call.
Let's see. John has a question. John Mokel. Instead of additional insured, how does Open Pilot work for your friend flying your plane?
Not well. It covers you. If you have a pilot flying your airplane that doesn't meet their qualifications and isn't listed as a named pilot, then if they crash your plane, you're not insured. If the pilot meets the open, you're insured, but the pilot is not. So your insurance company, after they paid the hull claim because your friend landed a gear up, for example, or ran into the fuel pumps, they're likely to go after your friend because your friend is not covered.
Okay. Let's see here. Another anonymous question. Are companies more concerned with total time or PAC?
That's going to be it depends on the rest of the application. If you have, if you're a very low time pilot, then it's, going to be different than if you're very high time. Over a couple hundred hours, it's not going to matter.
Okay. Let's see here. One of my partners.
Disparity only really exists, under 100 hours between the two.
Okay. All right. Let's see here. Question from John. I'm John DeJong. One of my 4 partners is an A&P. The other is an IA. They do our annual. The plane has recently exceeded TBO. These 2 partners say the engine is good. No metal, good compression, normal oil usage. If there was any damage, let's just say a bird strike, there hasn't been one, by the way, this is just hypothetical, would the insurance pay for damages even though we are over TBO?
It really depends on the policy, but I've not seen a policy that required you to follow recommendations. What they require you is to have an, current and effective airworthiness certificate, which means you've met all the FAA requirements. And TBO is just a recommendation. Now I will point out that, in some jurisdictions, because state law has a lot to say about how insurance is, even if it's aviation insurance, as to how the insurance is interpreted. Some states, for example, if your over TBO engine, were to fail and you end up crashing someplace, in some states and some insurance policies could potentially, try to claim that, it was not an airworthiness thing, though I don't think that would fly in most places. The kinds of times you do see it is if there is a technical actual violation. For example, you let an AD on the tail go past the 100 hours because you were, but you were due for the annual next month, so you just figured you'd do it during the annual. Okay, and the engine quits. Now, some states will let the insurance company get out of it because it wasn't airworthy because you went past an airworthiness directive. Other states require that a technical unairworthy condition or violation of the contract has to have been materially involved in the crash. So, in this example with a tail AD, they'd still have to pay up, for an engine failure. And other states will look at it like, well, it was a contract. You agreed to keep it airworthy. You didn't, so there's no insurance. So that can depend, which is one reason it's good to know really what the status of your airplane is and when your ADs come due. And a lot of them are 100 hours, and if people that fly over 100 hours, I see airplanes, on annual inspections all the time that they've overflown an AD. Because they flew a lot that year. Mostly they had it done at the annual, but in fact, the AD said every 100 hours. So potentially they were flying for 10, 15, 20 hours without insurance.
Okay, I understand. Let's see here. Steve DeJong has another question. Steve says he is a 73-year-old pilot. He's been a pilot since 1969, has over 1,500 hours, CMI, EMI, AGI, IGI, no incidents or accidents. He holds a second-class medical. I have 3 partners with no accidents, 900-hour private, a 500-hour commercial, and a 200-hour private pilot. None have instrument ratings. We own a 76 PA-28 235. Is cost of insurance going to keep increasing because of my age beyond what they would have to pay without me? We are insured for the plane. They insured the plane for $80,000, and they currently pay about $1,400 a year. We use an aviation insurance broker to shop for the best price.
My first piece of advice would be for the other 3 guys to get their instrument ratings. That's gonna help. The 235 is looked at as a cross country, people hauling machine. So, it was similar to the 182. The insurance company is expecting that you're putting passengers in it, possibly 4 passengers in it, and carrying a load to go somewhere else. You're not just using that to zip around the pattern. And I would, it doesn't directly answer the question, but I would say they should work on their instrument rating, particularly the commercial pilots. But it can be done, but you don't see too much of that. Is it going to continue increasing because of age? I think what's going to, if you've had this plane for a while, and I would say more of a factor is their credentials than your own. So I would have them working on their instrument rating. That will help your premiums. I don't know what's going to keep them going up.
Okay. Let's see here. What percentage of the cost of avionics or a new engine would be a legitimate increase in hull value coverage? So,
Uh, um, market value is usually about half of the, half of the installed cost, for the first year, somewhere around that on the avionics. In the thing to keep in mind about aviation insurance, it's stated value insurance. So if you and the insurer will agree on the value, they're going to present you a premium that has some relationship to that stated value, of course. But I mentioned it before, what helps you sleep at night? A $20,000 avionics install is probably $10,000 worth of equipment. Is it reasonable to add $20,000 to the whole value? Probably not. Could it be reasonable in that first year to add $10,000? Well, look at the market. Look at what equivalent planes would sell for. Think about it specifically from that perspective. All right, if something catastrophic happened to my aircraft, what would it cost me to get into another one adequately or similarly equipped, and use that.
okay. Well, that's okay. Thank you. Eben has Mark Eben. How about personal injury protection policy for extra coverage?
Personal injury protection is something we see in auto policies, I think. No fault insurance, I don't know of any aviation policies that offer, or aviation carriers that offer any personal injury protection. I'm not well versed on the auto side of things.
Okay, all right.
The question might also be kind of referring to an umbrella liability policy, which I do know people that have umbrella liability policies, sometimes through the homeowners and sometimes separate. And sometimes that can be a good way to get yourself, additional insurance above and beyond whatever the primary coverage is. But you got to look at the individual policies. I've talked to people that have those policies that aviation is specifically excluded, and I have had other people that had policies that aviation was not specifically excluded. If it's not specifically excluded, unless there's a limitation to what actually is covered, then your personal umbrella policy would come in on top of whatever coverage you had on the aircraft.
Okay, something to definitely look into. Let's see here. Trent has a question. Please define quote unquote low time pilot. I am a 300 hours with 155 hours with a tail wheel.
It's another great, it depends answer. With 155 hours tail wheel, if you're trying to get yourself insured on the tail dragger, then you're not terribly low time. But if you're looking at a new Cessna 421, you're probably pretty low time. So it all is relative to the application, what you're trying to fly. I don't think there's a hard fast, well, you're low time until you meet a certain hour cutoff.
Okay. Let's see here. A question, quote, or comment. So you're saying don't go directly to the underwriting company, go through a broker.
I don't know of any cases where the underwriters will typically write a policy directly to the insured, except in the case of a captive insurer like Avemco. So if you'd like a policy through any of the primary market of aviation insurers, then you'd have to use a broker relationship.
Okay. Let's see here. Is there liability insurance, or is there liability insurance only available? So just liability.
Yeah, we could do liability only. You know, like I mentioned earlier, not every insurer is going to be interested in that. Something that is an in between, if you're sticker shocked by full coverage, and you're thinking about liability only, what I like to always tell my clients, potential clients, is to consider, you know, if they're strongly considering liability only, I will often throw back to them the idea of ground not in motion coverage. That will be somewhat of a middle ground. It's not going to protect anything in flight or in movement, but if that hangar falls down on your aircraft, you're protected. So there is some whole coverage there. I like that as an option a whole lot better than I like the idea of liability only.
Okay. And another person is asking, what about clubs? Like aviation clubs, insurance for aviation clubs?
Well, that's a good way to reduce the costs overall, spreading it amongst lots of people. What each carrier defines as a club, usually there's a threshold somewhere in the 5 or thereabouts pilots named, where they start to ponder, is this a club? And rates typically go up, but it may, you know, on a per member basis, per named pilot basis, it may be worth their while to go that route.
Okay. Let's see here. David has a question. Recently, I leased a newly constructed T hangar. He's never set foot inside this hangar or put anything in the hangar. The county and the hangar owner, the owner of the hangar, T hangars, are insisting that I get quote unquote premises insurance, and then of course name them as insured. He's trying to wrap his mind around having to incur premium cost when he presents zero risk.
Based on this being a liability question, aren't, you know, I mean, it would seem to me he's likely to be planning to put something in it. Otherwise, you know, other than storing air, I'm not sure why you would lease it. You know, if you have a particular date where you're going to start occupying the hangar, I would start by writing back and say, you know, I have a contract for an airplane. I will, you know, purchase it on such and such a date, at which point that I will have, you know, insurance on my aircraft in the hangar. You know, you really can't lease a hangar for most airports without putting something aviation related into it, i.e. an aircraft.
Okay. Something from David. My assured partner summary states medical payments $5,000 per person. What does this mean? His medical payments are 5,000. Yeah.
Yeah, the med pay goes specifically to the medical bills and is offered in addition to the $100,000 typical sublimit. Kristen may be able to talk from the legal side of that a little more.
Yeah, basically it's you know, if you know, you forget to put down the landing gear and it skids in and you know, your passenger bangs their head on the instrument panel and goes to the hospital and gets a couple of stitches and ends up with a $1,500 bill, you know, your insurance will pay that. And it's, you know, it's in addition to the 100,000, but it only goes for, you know, medical payments incurred
and,
you know, by
actual.
Yeah, actual medical payments. You know, no pain, no emotional distress, pain and suffering, etc. That kind of thing. It only goes to defray emergency room cost and other medical.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, 5,000 these days. I know Kristen briefed on typical limits these days. Million overall, 100,000 either per passenger or per person, depending on your insurer. And then usually either 3,000 or 5,000 is what we're seeing these days as typical limits on liability side.
For the medical payments.
For the medical payments, 3,000 or 5,000 in medical payments.
Okay. David has a question. Hasn't everybody been cheering GA safety stats?
Yeah, we're getting better as pilots, but we still have claims. We have less fatalities, but we have a lot of claims still. We have a lot of broken, bent airframes still that are more expensive to fix than they were yesteryear. And, as Kristen knows from her insurance defense side of things, we live in a litigious world. So, it's expensive to represent the insured as well.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see here. Greg Jackson. What is the purpose of the broker? They must add cost. Why don't more insurers insure directly to the pilot?
Yeah, so I get paid on your policy by the carrier, but that relationship, the carrier, they need somebody to act as a salesman, and so whether they're paying it based on a commission basis to a broker, or they're paying it directly to their salespeople, like some of the captive agencies do, both in aviation and anywhere else. You go into a State Farm, for instance, for home or auto, or Allstate agency. Those are captive agencies. They're not dealt with with a broker's sort of relationship. It's the way the industry operates. The payments are going to be made somewhere to that salesperson.
Okay. We have two questions left. One of them is, before we wrap up, please provide the name of David's agency, which I think we will do that in the chat area. I believe either Drew or Jen will put David's contact information in there. You can also reach out to me also afterwards. And so Patricia has a question. FYI, there is excess liability offered in aviation markets. Analogous to home auto umbrella policies. However, I have found it will only be written on a base policy that is a 1 million smooth. Harder to get now that there are fewer writing 1 million smooth.
Yeah, well, so the way the carrier is going to look at that is if you're not going to a combined single limit policy, a smooth policy, then that is the excess liability, bumping it up. So, and it's not quite analogous to it's certainly not to auto. I could call my auto insurance agent and say, hey, I'm looking for a lower deductible or a higher deductible in exchange for lower premiums, vice versa. We don't see that so much. It's not as configurable, manipulable in aviation. But if you have a need for a $1 million smooth policy, or if you're looking to go to $1 million with a $250,000 per passenger sub limit, talk to your broker about that. These are things that we can ask for just when nobody asks the question. If it's not specified beforehand, as a straight, across the board, it's pretty much going to be those $1 million, 100,000, 5,000. limits.
I suspect that part of the problem, see, from the excess insurer standpoint, they want the primary insurance, which would be your aircraft primary policy, to have enough skin in the game so that they will vigorously defend. Because with a sublimit of 100,000, as I indicated earlier on, I got a lot when I was practicing law. I got a lot of assignments from the insurance company that stated, try to settle it for policy limits. I mean, their primary thing was they didn't want me to run up a big bill for them. They wanted this to go away, and they were willing to pay the 100,000 right off the get-go to make that happen and to close the file. And that's probably what the excess insurer is trying to avoid.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. If it's a separate agent, separate carrier, for sure. They're a secondary insurance coverage. They want your primary to defray everything before it gets to them.
Okay.
Swat it all away.
Okay. Let's see here. There's a comment quickly for Kristen that we're going back to the T hanger. David said that, yes, he has a plane. It will eventually go in the hangar. It's in Phoenix, getting avionics and airframe enhancements. So it might be a year before it's completed. The waiting list for the hangar space in Vegas is over a year long. So when this opened up, he jumped on it. So that's why he's got this. He didn't want to let this hangar go. So here he is with a hangar for a year before it can put a plane in it.
Well, the first thing I would look at is on your lease, if you've got a deadline to put a plane in there. Because if you do, and you're making waves, they may kick you out of the hangar figuratively, since you're not in there. All they have to do is give it to somebody else, change the lock, and you don't want to risk losing the hangar. So that'd be the first thing I'd look at. If there's no limitations as to how long it takes you to put the plane in there, and probably the next thing I would do before I started a fight with the airport, because you're going to have a longer term relationship, I would look as to see how much it would cost to add it to your homeowner's policy temporarily.
Okay.
Because that might just be, less than your cable bill a month, a lot less than your cable bill a month. And that might be the, easiest way to do it, and get the airport off your back without, creating unnecessary drama that could come back and bite you later. If that doesn't work, then you can consider fighting it.
Do you think David, if David has this hangar and it's his technically per letter of the contract, but his plane won't go in there, can he have, if I'm going to go back to something you had mentioned earlier, that something aviation related needs to be stored in there, an airplane or a bucket full of old avionics and wheel pants could be stored in there, maybe not an airplane at this moment, just airplane related stuff, which that would qualify? Or could he also say, I have someone that I can rent my hangar to for 9 months until would that need to be spelled out in the contract?
Well, first of all, you got to look at the lease, because the lease, of course, is the contract.
Okay.
And what's driving all of this is that the FAA started a push about 5 years ago, partially because they're getting a lot of gas from the public, is that they've started to lean on airports to get rid of people out of, hangars that weren't aircraft related. And of course, this only applies to airports that have received FAA money, but that's most of them. And the FAA has taken the not unreasonable position that, we've sunk, the taxpayer has sunk money into this airport and this ground, and it's for aviation use. So somebody doesn't get to, rent this hangar, that's cheaper than, renting a storage facility downtown, to stick 2 cars and an RV in. Because that's not what the aviation trust fund is for. So the FAA has been driving this bus and forcing, as they should, in my opinion, forcing airports to get a little more sticky about who's got what in these hangars. I mean, it's not at all uncommon, even sometimes for, small airports that don't know any better, to decide that hangar out there, they aren't going to lease it to the public for aviation because they're going to store, park equipment for the city, which again is a big no-no, because it's partially subsidized by taxpayers, and in particular the aviation community through fuel excise taxes, etc. So, it depends on how caught up the local airport authority is and what they've written into the contract. So you need to see what's written into the contract, i.e. your lease, before you can figure out what it is you can get away with. And so if there isn't any limitations on how long it takes you to put an airplane in there, like I said, I would see about adding it to your homeowner's insurance, and send them a copy, an endorsement on that, and tell them your airplane, this is the airplane I own, and it's in maintenance, and it will be back as soon as it's done. I wouldn't tell them it might take a year. I'd tell them it'll be back as soon as it's done, that you're not entirely sure when it's going to be done. Again, it depends on what the lease says.
Okay. So someone just what you just were saying, if somebody chimed in real quick and said, FYI, I see some hangars that are being used by some guys as a hobby garage fixing old cars. So yeah.
Well, I mean, if there is a waiting list at the airport, I mean, if I'm looking to rent a hangar at the airport, and there's a hangar of that would be normally rented out that's full of that kind of stuff, I'd be all over the airport.
Mm-hmm.
Airport manager would be on speed dial. I'd be banging him twice a day.
That's right.
My local airport authority, and you got to take those issues seriously. The grants that the FAA ends up awarding the airports is many times the amount of the local money. So the local community could be on the hook for $8+ for every one that they spend locally if they're not keeping with those range assurances, and the FAA will come in and take a look at those things.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. Well, it looks like we've hit all the questions. I know some people. So with that, I want to say good night to you guys and thank you for your time. I do appreciate that very much, Kristen and David.
Thank you, Brad.
Oh, of course. And for all those attending, thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate that. And I think at that, we will just kind of wrap everything up and say good night to everybody. So thank you. And we'll see you probably, hopefully at Oshkosh. Take care, everybody.
Hoping so.
Okay. Bye-bye.
See you later. Night.
Good night.
Good night.